Hello and welcome to a special holiday edition of Power and Politics. I'm JP Tasker in Ottawa, where we're counting down to the return of Parliament, and it's expected to be a busy fall sitting. Prime Minister Mark Carney has vowed to continue delivering his agenda at a fast pace, and we'll get a better idea of what the cost of that will be when he introduces a budget. Meanwhile, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre will be back in the House of Commons for the first time since March. He cruised to victory in an Alberta by-election, but remains under the microscope as he faces a leadership review in January. And the race to lead the NDP begins this week, a job left vacant after the party suffered its worst election defeat in history. We've got our weekly wrap panel here for their wrap of the summer and their look ahead to the fall. Joining me now is Michael Solberg. He's a former staffer in the Harper government. Zane Velji is a former strategist for the Alberta NDP. And Laura D'Angelo was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Let's kick off with a look at Prime Minister Mark Carney and what to expect from his Liberal minority government.
We're doing what's necessary in order to get the best deal for Canadians, and we get the best deal for Canadians, we'll agree to it.
I expect that the discussions will intensify between now and the end of the month, and we'll be working hard on that. Our phone is ringing off the hook from other countries who want to do more with Canada. And so we're going to focus more and more of our time on those positive aspects going forward. We're seeking the best deal for Canadians. We have not yet reached that deal. Negotiations will continue. It's possible that they may not conclude by the 1st of August. We will now match the United States by removing all of Canada's tariffs on U.S. goods specifically covered under CUSMA.
Trade talks with the U.S. have dominated the Prime Minister's summer, but it's also been, a lot of other activity and other files. He already got rid of the consumer carbon tax. He has passed the major projects legislation, and he has also dropped, of course, those reciprocal tariffs on CUSMA, as we just heard in that clip. But the sectoral tariffs on steel, aluminum, on softwood, they're still on. So I want to get you guys, give me your honest assessment of what you think this government has done so far, how they're performing, and if things are on the right track. Laura, let's start with you. What do you make of the Prime Minister and his time in office to this point?
So I think right now, up to this point, it's been the Mark Carney show, which makes perfect sense given how he became leader and how they won the election, right? I think that makes a lot of sense. But what I'm starting to watch and what I think is going to be really fascinating as we head into a more traditional parliamentary session is caucus relations. This is a new part of any job, frankly, for Prime Minister Carney. Prime Minister Carney is used to being the governor of a bank, a CEO, chair of a board. Those are big jobs where ultimately you get to make the decisions, right? You're trying to bring your department heads and whomever else along with you. This is very different, right? Now, you could either look at it as you have 179 team members, if you're into sports analogies, which I'm not, or you have 179 shareholders or members of the board. That is a very different dynamic. And it's something that I don't think we're used to seeing from Prime Minister Carney. He hasn't been a member of caucus before, so he's not necessarily used to the politics of that, and he hasn't had to lead it. And those of us who watch politics all the time know that often when you start to see the honeymoon slip, you're seeing that with caucus relations first. You're seeing some of that angst. They're going to hold you accountable because ultimately they have to answer to their constituents for decisions the Prime Minister is often making. And so I'm really watching how caucus is shaping up. I'm really trying to hear and listen to some of those smaller press conferences and what's the tone and tenor of that, especially as, to your earlier point, this is supposed to be a pretty rock and roll fall for the government.
Yeah, and obviously caucus is what took down Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. That was his weak spot. That's really what pushed him out. Michael, how do you think the Prime Minister has done so far to this point? What do you make of his actions over the summer?
Look, well, I wouldn't call it sunny ways necessarily, but he's, to borrow an old term, but no, he's clearly doing well. I think the polling supports that. It's early days. But he was elected on a very clear mandate to accomplish a number of different things, some of which he's made some progress towards. And you mentioned it, JP. He's removed the retail price on carbon, which was a big election promise. He stood up the major projects legislation and passed it. But he's also elected under a mandate to go after Trump and to sort out Canada's position amongst this trade war, which has very real economic impacts, of course. And ultimately, I think we're seeing very little progress, at least in terms of outcomes, really on any front. The major projects office has been announced will be stood up shortly. here, which is a step in the right direction. But on things like housing, he has yet to put the right leadership into Build Canada Homes. The trade war is ongoing with rather, I think, a clumsy message, a continued use of hockey analogies to describe kind of our current position and the rationale behind those measures. So all of this to say, I'd say he's doing fine. But at some point, Canadians and industry are going to want more than just promises and more than just ambition and aspiration. They're going to want to see real outcomes. And he's already behind, I think, on that message, at least as it relates to the trade war. And then on his own internal issues, domestic ones, like these nation-building projects and this grand bargain and exercise he's having with the provinces, there's still nothing to report on that. I know Minister Hodgson has said, wait and see what the fall brings. Fine, we can take him at his word. But if they go through this fall session without some clear wins, some early wins out of this government, I think the Prime Minister's risking the wheels falling off in terms of his popularity, which he's so far been enjoying.
Yeah, Zane, let's zero in on that Canada-U.S. trade relationship, because the Prime Minister, as we all know, was really elected on that elbows up mantra. And since then, we've seen him drop the digital services tax. We've seen him drop the retaliatory tariffs, at least some of them. And he has not matched the U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum. He is not going that extra 25% that Trump put on us. So he's trying to show some goodwill to the Americans. But to this point, he hasn't really got that much for it. How do you think he's handling that file that was really front and center back in the election?
Not particularly well as it relates to two things: outcomes, as Michael mentioned, and communicating with us around what progress has been made over the summer. Listen, he not only got elected on that elbows up mantra, he got elected on that mantra coupled with speed, with meeting deadlines that were aggressive, that were bold, that were eye-popping, that would say, whoa, Mark Carney, government doesn't work that fast. Well, guess what? We're now at the end of August, and Mark Carney has realized government doesn't work that fast. He's blown a couple of deadlines, and when you blow deadlines, people will generally excuse you, and we'll talk about the Carney honeymoon period that he's in a second. People excuse you blowing deadlines, but the quality of the product, should you blow those deadlines, have to be greater. So Mark Carney's operating on, let me get the best deal. Well, you've kept upping the ante, Prime Minister Carney, on what that best deal looks like by blowing these arbitrary, I would say, self-imposed timelines that you set out. Now you're increasing the bar on yourself, which doesn't seem all that politically smart. Now, he's still in the honeymoon period where I think, most Canadians are willing to forgive even the quality of the deal or what happens, but we'll wake up at some point in September. We'll see what's going on. We'll see the progress, and we'll see that a lot hasn't necessarily happened. And frankly, a lot hasn't necessarily been iteratively communicated to us around what we should be looking for, when, how, what that ultimately should feel like. And so I think the Carney risk here is that many times honeymoons turn into nightmares. See no further than the 2014 movie Honeymoon, in which very quickly people can turn on you. And Mark Carney has done one thing this summer, which is reveal himself and add some clarity to the mix. And that clarity is that he is a conservative-leaning liberal. The cuts that he wants to make to the public service, the technocratic appeal, the spend on defense, none of those things necessarily hit Trudeau lane, which is obviously what they wanted to go from a political strategy perspective, but they're also true to who Mark Carney is and is revealing to be. And that reveals a lot of who he is and what opportunities the NDP and others may ultimately have with the Carney government. But honeymoons can turn sour very, very quickly, and they should not expect that these things have a long tail that ultimately diminishes. People can turn on you very quickly, and he's revealed quite a few cracks and quite a few directionalities around what he believes and how he believes it. And that's going to provide nothing but opportunity for the opposition parties.
Laura, feel free to weigh in on the U.S. relationship, but I also want to pick up on what Zane said there about budget cuts, because that is also a major milestone that they're going to reach this fall, right? The first federal budget from the former central banker. This is his chance to put a stamp on the federal finances. He's all about the money, we know. What are you watching for there? I mean, there's potentially major cuts. A 15% across the board cut is a possibility to all government departments. That could be a political hot potato for this government too, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also really challenging for Prime Minister Carney, given he is an Ottawa area MP, right? And we saw, I mean, Pierre Poilievre, there was a lot of factors into losing Carleton, but that is a really big challenge for an Ottawa area MP, right? I live in the city, and let me tell you, there's a lot of people who are already getting those slips. There's a lot of jobs that are starting to be gone. So I'm absolutely watching for cuts, and I'm watching on the more micro scale the impact here in Ottawa. But on a bigger scale politically, this is really new. This is a really new posture for Liberals generally. This is going to be a very new thing for experienced ministers to talk about, and a very new thing for MPs to try to sell to constituents. And the promises in the platform were pretty significant. So what I'm curious to see is actually the interplay. We're getting a budget in the fall. It is likely we'll be getting a budget again in the spring. That's really short order. That's about 6 months. So I think what's going to be interesting is what happens in the fall and what sort of signals are we getting for the spring, because I think that there may be some balance trying to happen between needing to show immediate change, but also not wanting to shock all Canadians right off the hop.
Yeah, Michael, what are you watching for with this budget? We're expecting it fairly early on in the parliamentary session. What do you think is going to be coming down the pipe?
Yeah, well, the finance minister, I believe, was clear that they intend to table this thing come October. So we don't have a very long to wait here. But I really do think that the austerity measures that the prime minister dictated his cabinet to seek will be the big story. I think pragmatically, because of what the cuts ultimately mean to various government services, which have already been critiqued in terms of their malaise and kind of slow churn. Does gutting the amount of public sector workers contribute further to that? Maybe. Or does it create a lean, mean machine? I don't know, but I do think that will be the story. And I also think, frankly, it is that political landmine, potentially, for the prime minister. I always said that Justin Trudeau is the best New Democrat prime minister that we never had. And that's certainly true when you compare him to Mark Carney, who's, I think, drugged the party ideologically so far to the center, even the center right. And I do think politically, when you're starting to cut public sector workers who are, by the way, largely unionized, does that give an opening finally to the New Democrats, who are clearly continue to flail but are seeking new leadership through their own process there? But does that give them an opportunity to finally carve out a bit of a narrative and a message that would be, frankly, a risk to the prime minister as he seeks to reinforce and kind of crystallize his support, as of course he's ultimately going to seek a majority mandate here and probably the not so distant future. So every step of the way here, what he does policy wise needs to be part of a political calculus in an effort to keep his coalition together, because it's of course Pierre Poilievre's and the eventual leadership of the New Democrats charge to chip away at that to avoid handing Prime Minister Carney that ultimate majority, and in fact to form governments of their own. So I wonder if the budget will create vulnerability for them where they hope they wouldn't have to confront it.
Okay, Zane, a quick final thought to you on that.
Let's just quickly talk about the 15% over, I believe it is 3 years, JP. You can correct me if I'm wrong. So it's not a 15 on this budget.
No.
That's a crazy number. Like, that's a really high number. To be clear, you can't do that simply just with salaries. There's going to be programmatic cuts, and there's going to have to be telegraphing of service cuts here. And that is, to Michael's point, where the extension of where the NDP, but frankly, who cares about the NDP? We'll talk about them in a second. Where the public will start to notice immediately. When you start telegraphing that certain services, people don't like having things taken away from them, even if they don't use them all that often, because it's using the American term, it's an entitlement. It's already something they have. And it's even if they were theoretically going to use it or access it, they want it in their orbit. And so to take it away, which is what this 15% cut, should it be reported correctly, is ultimately striving for, it will go down to service levels. It won't just be people in Ottawa that will feel the pain. It will be people all across the country that have a theoretical or a service that they use that will be cut. And that is when a potential honeymoon could end very, very abruptly, very, very quickly, because it's not about the technocratic skills you promised during a campaign. It's about how you feel the people in the moment in the fall of 2025 and beyond. And that's a very different skill set. It's the same political game, very different skill set. Winning that campaign and reading the room in the fall with the budget are two completely different skills. Let's hope the Carney team has the folks around them to make those right calls.
All right, let's leave it there. For the Liberals, Pierre Poilievre is returning to the House of Commons as official opposition leader, but the Alberta by-election wasn't the only hurdle he will have to clear to keep his job. We're going to discuss the challenges awaiting Poilievre and whether he'll change his leadership strategy as he faces them. Next, stay with us. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre will make a much-anticipated return to the House of Commons this month. He's been without a seat since the spring election when he lost his long-held Ottawa riding. But Poilievre is back after a landslide win in an Alberta by-election. He says he spent the summer listening to Canadians, taking stock of his and his party's defeat last April. With a leadership review set for January, what can we expect from the leader of the official opposition? It's time to dig into the state of the Conservative Party.
Thank you very much to the great people of Battle River Crowfoot.
Well, I'm loving the campaign. I'm having a lot of fun, actually. I love the people of Battle River Crowfoot. I'm having a lot of fun. I'm meeting a lot of people who are very angry about the way that the federal government has abused and mistreated Alberta. But we want to see some wins for Canada, and we have suggestions on how to get those wins, because really we have to put our country first, and that's what we're asking for.
Conservatives will fight to put Canada first, and we will work with anyone from any party. We continue to extend our hand to Mr. Carney.
He's even worse than Justin Trudeau. Where are Mark Carney's elbows these days? He seems to have misplaced them. Carney is one walking, talking, broken promise.
We'll obviously hold the government to account and oppose Liberal policies of high inflation, out-of-control immigration, crime, housing costs, and youth unemployment. We'll also propose positive ideas.
Our political analysts are back. Michael Solberg, Zane Velji, and Laura D'Angelo. Nice to see you guys. Thanks for coming back for round two. Michael, I'll start with you. This is your forte. You and I talked about that by-election earlier this summer, and you said there's no question about it. He's going to walk away with it. And he did. He got 80% of the vote. That was an easy victory for him. But he worked for it. I mean, he went out to every community barbecue, every Canada Day celebration I saw. He was really trying to hustle for votes, but he pulled it off. How do you feel about his standings now? He won that by-election, but if we're to believe most of the polls that are out there right now, a lot of people still preferring Carney.
Yeah, that is the challenge. Look, they've solved the most critical, I think, acute kind of problem, which is, of course, that he didn't have a seat. Now that he has that, he can kind of put that behind him. He's back in OLO. He can use the resources of the leader's office once again. So that is behind him. But there are many challenges that lay ahead. And to your point, his personal approvals are far behind Prime Minister Carney's right now. However, what you can kind of hang your hat on right now is numbers like what came out from Abacus and David Coletto that showed that the Conservatives actually have a marginal lead on the Liberals at this point in the summer. And what I think that shows is that the Conservative Party as a brand, as a political movement, still has a lot of credible momentum as a policy alternative to the Liberals. But what he does need to solve for is he himself continues to be a drag on the party, at least in terms of polling and those types of approvals that go into those metrics. And there are a number of ways that you can solve this. I think I think you need to have and demonstrate a bit more of a compassionate edge to yourself. Perhaps that's an oxymoron, but a compassionate part of yourself. I think you can do that through, credible, compassionate policy that targets, specific demographics. I think you can decentralize kind of the view of the party away from just the leader's office, profile some more of your bench strength and some talent on your front benches. I think you can do that. But look, obviously there are challenges that remain ahead. And, in opposition, the nature of that role is to find critique and chip away at the momentum of the government. And as we said in the previous segment, I think the Prime Minister is going to give up a lot of ammunition to the opposition this fall if they don't meet the extraordinarily high thresholds of expectation that the Liberal Party and the Government of Canada have given to Canadians, to provinces, to First Nations, to industry. If he doesn't meet that bar, Pierre Poilievre will have a lot of ammunition, I think, to build himself back up once again as a credible alternative to the Liberals. But, a lot of time left on the clock. But I think Pierre's up for the challenge.
Yeah, to Michael's point about the polls, I just want to comment on that. We did see Abacus show a 2-point lead for the Conservatives, but then we dig into some of the other polls and it's a little different story. I mean, Nanos has the Liberals up 12 points, Liaison Strategies, the Liberals are up 9, Leger, really trusted firm, they got the Liberals up 10 points. To the point about likability, though, that is perhaps maybe the most troubling thing, Laura, for Poilievre, because when they measure that factor, Abacus finds that Poilievre has -2, versus +18 for Mark Carney. So Mark Carney definitely more favorable among voters. What do you think that Poilievre has to do to try and turn this around? He's a known quantity at this point. We've just been through a very lengthy federal election. He's been front and center for so long. He's taken a bit of a step back over the summer. How does he get those numbers up? How does he improve his fortunes, do you think?
So I think there's a long laundry list of things we could talk about that Pierre Poilievre could do here, top of which might be changing his personality, which I'm not sure is really an option. But I woke up on August 19th to watch his victory speech, and it was like I had been through a time machine. It was like it was August 2024. The messaging was the same, the tone and tenor was the same, the way he was aggressive was the same. Like, it felt like timelines had converged. And when you couple that with the interview that Jenny Byrne gave on the Beyond a Ballot podcast,
right,
you get actually a pretty fascinating and clear picture, at least for some of the most senior, well, the leader and one of his most senior advisors, that they think they ran everything perfectly. They think, I'm paraphrasing, but a flawless campaign. And so I don't think there's a lot that's changing right now. And Canadians now know what that is. They're not in a moment of fury and anger like they were at Justin Trudeau. It is very clear that this is a different Liberal government than the previous one. And so Pierre Poilievre's continued shtick, this continued posture, more of the same, is not going to fly heading into the fall unless Mark Carney makes some kind of major mistake.
Yeah, Zane, to Laura's point, when you listen to his by-election victory speech, he says he wants to extend a hand to Mark Carney. He made kind of a performance out of that one. But then literally like 36 hours later or something to that effect, he was calling Carney worse than Justin Trudeau, a walking broken promise. He was piling on the criticisms on Friday after the retaliatory tariff walk back, saying he's losing. We're obviously seeing that Poilievre is reverting to form in many ways when push comes to shove, right?
Sure. He's also trying to figure out something we're all trying to figure out, which is, are we still in this Canada United moment, or are we back to normal? Can we go after the other side, or do we have to think about country first? Like, it's a crass, cynical observation, but everyone's testing it of every hour of the day to say, can we do our thing, or do we have to do the bigger thing? And it's really unclear where we are in that moment. So to give a Poilievre a bit of, maybe not grace, but it's almost like a live wire demonstration of that, of a guy trying to figure out, can I be who I need to be, or do I need to say the thing about the country so that, I don't look like I'm out of sync with the moment, which was actually the core of his criticism during the election. Listen, I think for Pierre Poilievre, he's got to take one job at a time. And what that is, to Michael's point, is that he's now got a seat. Check. The next thing is to keep his job, because to be clear, Michael's right. The conservative movement is formidable. The bench strength is formidable. People wanting Pierre Poilievre's job is going to be a real thing. And some might deny that that happens in January, and very well could not. But he's got to do what he needs to do in terms of what he needs to say, the money, the fundraising, the values, all those sort of things need to line up to Pierre Poilievre largely being a version of Pierre Poilievre that we have seen to keep his job. And then after that, I think Pierre Poilievre needs to pull out his superpower. I know many of us have been talking about how he can't do more of the same. He can't just keep being the same guy. But his superpower, if we go back to when he became viable as leader, it was predicting what the next big thing was in this country and communicating it effectively. And I hate to give Pierre Poilievre credit, but he was the first guy, probably out of any MP, take out jersey color, to talk about inflation, to double down, triple down on inflation, to be right on it, to be first on it. That coasted him through the leadership of the Conservative Party because he seemed prescient in a certain way. So my challenge to Pierre Poilievre is find the next thing, man. If that's your superpower, find the soft tissues, something we're not talking about, communicate it in a way that makes sense, double, triple down. But that's tomorrow's job. That's after he wins the leadership. I almost sound like I'm apologizing for him. I'm not intending to, but I'm just looking at this from a strategic perspective. He needs to do the job for January and then figure out how he predicts the future, which he did so miraculously well. And maybe that's a one and done thing and he can't do it again. But that seems to be a bit of his superpower, and communicate that in a viable way going forward. I think that's his path.
Yeah, so far he's talking about carbon tax 2.0. He was out last week talking about that. He is bringing up immigration as one issue he is suggesting will be a big feature of the Conservative message this fall, and then the electric vehicle mandate. Those are seemingly the things they want to focus on. Michael, do you think that there's any threat to his job? I know I've been speaking to Conservative sources. He has been on the phone all summer, talking to caucus, talking to party bigwigs, talking to donors. He has not rested since April. He is certainly trying to make an effort to keep everybody in line. He is not just assuming this is going to go his way. He's really putting in the work. Do you think that there is any viable challenge to him staying on as leader ahead of that review in January?
No, look, he called me. And for him to call me, you have to know there'd be hundreds of people on a list of numbers that he's calling, giving 10 or 15 minutes to. Like, he's putting in the work, to your point, JP, and to your sources. He's putting in the work to stay on. And that's what you need to do. And no, I haven't heard of any kind of credible threat to his leadership, and I think for good reason. I'll challenge a couple of the narratives here. One, that, the Conservatives blew a 25-point lead. Yeah, the Liberals made up a historic gap there with a meteoric rise through the early part of the year. But the Conservatives under Justin Trudeau were polling at 45%. When the ballots were all counted, they got, 41%? So they didn't lose a ton of their core support throughout the writ period. I'll paraphrase Stephen Harper, who would often say, you don't need to become more liberal to win an election in this country. You just need to clearly articulate a conservative vision. And that conservative vision was largely endorsed by Canadians. And I think the reasons for the losses there were not because of conservative policy. I think it was because of, an historic moment from Donald Trump. I think an utter collapse in the New Democrats, excellent vote efficiency, which you can always count on with the Liberals. But I don't lay conservative policy or that loss necessarily at the feet of Pierre Poilievre or a lack of pivoting. I think what he presented is still credible. I think it's still digestible, salient, important, and compelling. And obviously, you need to maneuver through the political landscape, and there are obviously changes that will need to come. But I think Pierre Poilievre as a brand and as a policy alternative is still compelling to Canadians.
That's a perfect segue, because when you're talking about what the Conservatives need to win, they need a strong NDP, and that's what we're going to be talking about in our next block. After falling flat in the federal election, the NDP are setting out to rebuild. That starts with choosing a new leader. Coming up next, what to expect from the NDP and its 7 MPs when they return to Parliament Hill for the fall sitting. Stay with us. After a devastating federal election, the NDP is starting the search for its new leader this month. That new leader will face the tough task of rebuilding the party in the wake of its worst electoral showing ever. The NDP went into the election with 24 MPs but left with only 7. That result means the NDP won't have official party status when those MPs return to the House of Commons. Let's bring in our political analysts to talk about what's up for the NDP. Michael Solberg, Zane Velji, and Laura D'Angelo are back with us. Zane, I'll start with you. The leadership contest starts soon. What does this party need to do to bring it back from the brink of extinction?
Well, let me paraphrase Michael Solberg and Stephen Harper, which is, you don't need to be more of a liberal to win as a New Democrat. You just need to articulate a New Democrat vision. And I think the last number of months have created that opening once again. Historically, is this a low point? Sure. And frankly, from a Western democracy perspective, are progressives on the mat right now a bit? Sure. But I think there are definitely large in number, and there's those that are wanting a positive, progressive, stitched together, comprehensive vision of what a New Democrat, what a social democrat is. And I think Mark Carney domestically is leaving that room. I think Pierre Poilievre continues to be a very interesting threat to the New Democrats, especially with his new love for labor, whether that is sincere or not. Some of his actions may need to prove. But we have seen across Western democracies that conservatives have started attracting labor. We've also seen demographic flips like crazy that I don't think we acknowledge enough in terms of old people now kind of being more progressive voters than young people, which are now leaning more conservative, especially young men. That's been a massive demo shift in terms of what progress looks like in this country. But this is a back to basics race. There's a few folks that are going to be very interesting. Heather McPherson out of Alberta, who I love, and I think is going to be a fantastic candidate. Potentially Valerie Plante. By the way, there is an interesting gender component to it. When you make a big mess, you usually hand over the reins to a woman to clean it up, which I think is terrible. We've seen it many times in our politics. I think that's where the NDP are headed here as well. But, thanks to the incredible people who are putting their hands up to not just get this party back to party status, but be a relevant point of Canadian sort of persuasion and policy, which frankly it was for a while, even in the last 10 years.
Laura?
Zane hit on the really important, factor here that there's a lot of paths available to the NDP. But there's two existential questions for the NDP, and they're mutually inclusive. One is leadership, which has started now, and one is the path forward. And I think it's so tempting, at least as a strategist, to talk about the path forward and to think about what that is, because there's a lot. There's progressive left, which, to Zane's point, Carney's left wide open. There's working class Canadians and unions, which is another really, historic part of the NDP. But I think there's room for something brand new to emerge. But the temptation to focus on that over leadership is one that, my unsolicited advice to the NDP is to try to tamp down. Because we've seen, I think with the last three major leaderships, Justin Trudeau, Pierre Poilievre, and Mark Carney, they are going to dictate the direction of the party and that rebuild. And so if you do all of this work over here, starting to figure out that path, just to elect a leader who has a totally different vision, I actually think it could hurt the NDP really significantly in the long term.
Yeah, and Michael, it's so hard when you only have 7 MPs to stand up for you in the House. You're not getting that press attention. They've really been left out of this conversation about the Canada-US fight entirely, and we can look at provincial polling in Ontario to learn more about that. Marit Stiles, the opposition leader, is at, I think, 12 or 13% in the latest poll I saw. Doug Ford is eating their lunch by being kept in Canada. How do the NDP turn this around? What is the path forward?
Well, I'll state the obvious. You need a credible leader that can actually command some attention and articulate a New Democrat vision. They barely had that under Jagmeet Singh. And obviously, in the absence of a leader at all, they really don't have it at all in this interim period. And look, 12 months ago, I would have presumed that, a career-long conservative pugilist like Pierre Poilievre and a literal high society central banker like Mark Carney would be actual boogeymen to progressive voters in this country, especially those who are voting New Democrat. But that just wasn't the case once the ballots were counted. We saw many people who had traditionally voted for the New Democrats, particularly from kind of the labor movement, vote for Pierre Poilievre. We saw people who, who at one point would have screamed from the rafters if the government was gutting climate policy, go out and vote for Mark Carney as he promised to get rid of the consumer carbon price, on militarization, on, and now we've seen him beating down organized labor this summer through the flight attendant dispute with Air Canada. You would imagine that there are some people who will feel orphaned given the policy landscape that we're in right now and how far the Overton window has moved to the right. But you can't capture those people without a credible leader. So I think you need to find someone who has the charisma and the organizing ability to pull the party out of debt, court new and exciting voter base, new and exciting candidates, and ultimately carve out kind of a narrative and a niche piece of the conversation and become the progressive alternative to the Liberals. So it's easier said than done, but that's precisely what they need.
Okay, let's leave it there on the NDP. Still to come, as MPs head back to Parliament Hill, our political analysts tell us what they are looking for this fall sitting. Stay right there. It was an eventful summer in Canadian politics, from trade talks and tariffs to a federal by-election. As MPs head back to Parliament Hill, we want to ask our political analysts what they're watching for this fall sitting. We have Michael Solberg, Zane Velji, and Laura D'Angelo back with us. Okay, Laura, let's start with you. What are you watching for this fall?
So I think over the summer, some of the existential dread that Canadians have felt over Canada-US relations has simmered. People are still watching it, but we kind of know that we're just living in this really tough spot for a while. And that means we're seeing a resurgence of those two main issues, affordability and housing, that were, really the focus nonstop before tariffs. And I'm really watching the housing file in particular. I'm watching it for two main reasons. One, it is still a massive crisis in this country and is going to continue. To your earlier point, JP, the four of us are millennials, right? Like, we live it and hear about it all the time. And Carney's government made some really big promises in the platform, and I think we're going to start seeing some pretty speedy movement on that in this fall, right? Build Canada Homes, which is for affordable and deeply affordable housing. I think we're going to start to see some movements on actual affordability of homes, which is different. I know there's rumblings about development charges and things like that. So I'm really watching Minister Robertson's office and the Prime Minister's office for what is coming out around housing. The second part of this file that I'm watching that I think is really interesting is I think this is going to be a great example of Prime Minister Carney's abilities as a politician, a prime ministerial politician. We know that Mark Carney is really comfortable in that big macro space, talking international relations, talking trade, talking the economy. But the honeymoon is going to end at some point. And Canadians are already turning their attention back to things that affect them day to day, affordability and housing. And if you have the big job, you have to also focus on the small things that matter to Canadians. And I think housing is going to be a really great litmus test for how Mark Carney can toggle between those two things, the really big macro pieces that we know he loves, but also the things that really matter to the people who put him in office.
Yeah, and he hasn't shown a ton of interest to this point in domestic issues, right? He seems to love the international stage. He loves going back and forth with Trump, but when it comes to domestic issues, not so much, at least to this point. Okay, quick responses from you guys on this one. Michael, we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, I think it could be an Achilles heel. Are we going to be sitting here 12 months from now and still not have a Build Canada Homes CEO? Are we still going to be in the search for leadership of that organization? And look, the Parliamentary Budget Officer put out a report that said that already we're trending to not meet the commitments. In fact, under the current plan, at least per the PBO, we'll be almost 1 million homes short of the goals of this government. So absolutely, I think it's a weakness of the prime ministers. At some point, they do have to turn their attention to domestic issues. Those are the issues that Canadians, I think, by and large, will feel most acutely. And in the past have been the ballot box question in past elections. This election that the prime minister won in the spring, foreign policy is rarely the ballot box question, but it was this time. But who knows if it will be the next time? And I don't suspect it will be. So he needs to get his domestic house in order.
30 seconds, Zane.
Housing at what societal cost? This is where the NDP can play, because Carney's promoting the current sort of public-private partnership, public money go into private. Who becomes richer off of this? Does this increase our income inequality? What does society look like as we try to build more homes? There's a cost greater than the cost of each home and the affordability of each home, and I think that's the lane for the New Democrats to play in. This is an onion that's got many layers, and we haven't even started those conversations as we come out of the potential collective hallucination that was the Canada moment of the election.
And you have something that you're watching for, too. Tell me about that, Zane.
It extends on what I just said, which is how long can Carney and co engineer the Canada moment? Because that is where, to your point, JP, Carney has played, to Laura's point, where Carney has played and shown interest in. It's to keep that moment of Canada on the global stage alive. At some point, we're going to move on to having housing, affordability, all these things that Laura's mentioned as being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 issues in Canada's place in the world and our relationship with the U.S. Either will be solved or we'll just be a frog in boiling water and we will stop caring and it'll just be the new normal. We normalize to so many things in our politics. We'll normalize to this. I hate to say it, but that's what will end up happening. And at that point, it's the Carney honeymoon, and it's the conversation of how long can they take something that happened organically in the election and extend on it. And does it extend through this parliament? And this sitting is my big thing to look for. And if it doesn't, you will see the Pierre Poilievre of past playing out, not just to win votes in January for his leadership, but more broadly as part of his overall package and suite of propositional things as he tries to win back voters heading into whenever our next election happens to be in this minority government.
Yeah, and Laura, can he keep up the breakneck pace of all this change too, right? I mean, there was a fairly active parliamentary calendar before they rose for the summer, trying to get that major projects bill through. What are we going to see in the fall? I mean, that's really the question, is like, can he still keep pedal to the metal, right, and keep delivering? Is he going to have a compliant parliament to do that? What do you think of what he's pitched here?
I mean, I think Zain has hit the nail on the head here, right? Like, the honeymoon is going to stop at some point, and to your point, they have to keep moving fast. They have to move really fast. One of the things that I think is going to be fun to watch between those two nexus points in the House is Prime Minister Carney has not really had the experience of the House of Commons yet, with Pierre Poilievre and Blanchette, two incredibly experienced opposition leaders and showmen in the House of Commons. And I think it's actually going to be quite interesting to watch, literally physically watch his face and his body language in the House of Commons and press conferences, because that is a totally new level of opposition that he is going to face.
Yeah, Michael, I mean, that's the thing. I keep thinking about that. Like, to this point, Carney's only squared off against Andrew Scheer, and even he wasn't there every day, right? They gave other Conservative MPs a chance to take on Carney in question period. Now he's going to go toe-to-toe with Poilievre, and that's where he's strongest.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and it won't even be the first time they faced off. Recall that then finance critic Poilievre faced off with Mark Carney at Finance Committee a handful of years ago, and it was a bloodbath. So that is Pierre's strength. And, you know, up until this point, the Prime Minister has been effectively oppositionless. And he'll continue to feel those effects, at least as it relates to the New Democrats. He does have the premiers on side. He's got kind of the Parliament agreeing to work together, largely because Canadians have kind of demanded that. So he needs to crystallize his gains during this relatively easy period, because it's not always going to be this year easy. We're not all going to be singing Kumbaya for much longer here. So do we start to see signs of the cracks forming this fall? I suspect so. And the Prime Minister should work very, very hard throughout the fall, like I said, to crystallize the gains that he promised over the summer.
Yeah, give me a quick thought on the premiers, actually, Michael, because I was thinking about how bad relations were between Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump. But then I was like, you know what? You could probably even argue it was worse between Trudeau and the premiers. And Carney's had some success on that one in particular. He has the meeting out of the palm of his hand. You know, Doug Ford effectively had a sleepover with the guy right in Muskoka this summer, and even Danielle Smith seems to be all right, purring like a kitten in some instances. What do you make of that relationship, and how does that affect his agenda?
Well, it's greatly so. I think the toughest critics of any prime minister is not Putin, it's not Trump, it's not Xi Jinping, it's your own premiers. And to date, they've been largely swimming in the same direction. And I think that's huge. In fact, generationally so. I don't remember the last time you had premiers out of Saskatchewan and Alberta in particular working so closely, or at least feeling this much optimism to work with a Liberal prime minister. But you're already starting to see the cracks form, at least as it relates to the tariffs on canola coming out of China. You know, we've seen both Scott Moe and Danielle Smith start to critique the prime minister on that. They're starting to be critical of the eroding relationship with Donald Trump. So, you know, it might not be sunny ways for much longer, but certainly for now, I think there's big items that they can work on together, but that probably won't last forever.
Speaking of the West and some possible irritants, give me your thing that you're watching, Michael. I think you want to talk about natural resources.
You bet. I want to talk about natural resources, how to harness them, and that's through ultimately Bill C-5 and the Major Projects Office, which the minister has announced will be stood up very, very soon, and you know is an important part of that process. And I think at this point in the government's mandate, this will be their legacy piece. I think if Mark Carney is in legacy building mode, it will be on these so-called nation building exercises. How do we trade amongst each other? If our largest trading partner has become so hostile? And this is where I think he's set expectations extraordinarily high. I think of any suite of policy options that he's put forward or inspired to be, this is the one where the standards have been set highest. And the Federal Major Projects Office is going to play a key role in stamping approvals of many projects from all 10 provinces, all 3 territories. And if we don't see significant movement on that, and it's just business as usual with premiers quarreling, First Nations protesting, projects dying on the vine, then I think the honeymoon grinds to a halt.
Laura, one thing that's interesting is, I don't know if you saw the comments from Tim Hodgson, the Natural Resources Minister. He was criticizing the past Liberal government, Justin Trudeau in particular, on the LNG file, saying they kind of fumbled this, not getting our liquefied natural gas to Europe when they are hungry for this fuel source. This new government saying we're full steam ahead. We want to get those fuels over to Europe. We're seeing a major shift, I think, on the natural resources file in particular, right?
a major shift on the natural resources file. And I think it's also interesting watching the dynamic and the interplay between Carney and Hodgson, right? Two men who come from business backgrounds who are used to saying we are moving fast, this is the speed, let's go. And everyone, jumps to account there. And I think this fall is going to be the moment where we see if they can continue to drive that through a very slow machine that is government, or if they get slowed down and a little bit bogged down. But I do think when we think about natural resources and we talk about the premiers, right, and how well the Prime Minister has done there, and Minister Hodgson, frankly, at West,
right,
that is where we're seeing some of these superpower strengths that we talked about during the election for Prime Minister Carney and some of his ministers really coming to fruition. Some of that negotiating, the bridge building, understanding how to build relationships at that senior level. Yeah. And I think we're going to see a little bit more of that through the fall.
Zane?
Be careful what you wish for. I do agree with my colleagues, but listen, this is government. This is not business. It's not just about the results, it's about how you got there. So at some point, the environmental heads will rear up and being like, wait, what are we doing now and for what expense? And the Indigenous, as Michael has mentioned, the First Nations voices, which have been railroaded through this process, will keep talking and keep suggesting that their voices were not included in this. And at some point, the how might matter more than the what. So going back to Michael's point, if this is the Carney legacy piece, be careful what you wish for, because the how in the process accounts for the legacy just as much as whatever projects are spit out on the back end of this thing. And I think that is going to be a very important piece as we look forward to the next couple of months, because frankly, there are folks within the Liberal circles that are probably questioning why the natural resources side of their government is being run like the Conservative Party of Canada, not like the measured, balanced approach that they've been used to for the last 10 years. And just because you want to run away from the Trudeau legacy doesn't mean you run away from the process that gets things done in a reasonable way in this country. Now, am I the only one with that opinion? Maybe, but we'll find out to see, what that broader suite looks like of folks, marching against it.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much to our panel of political analysts, Michael Solberg, Zane Velji, Laura D'Angelo. Michael and Zane and Laura will be back on Power and Politics every Friday for the weekly Wrapped panel. That panel also comes out as a podcast, which goes live on Saturdays starting this week. And of course, David Cochran will be back in the host chair starting tomorrow. I'm JP Tasker. Thank you so much for watching this special holiday edition of Power and Politics.